This is Andrew Stotz of Stotz Investment Research, and in this video I'm going to talk to you about how to become financially world-class. This is part 3 of a 5-part series, and today I'm going to talk to you about why profitable growth matters. Now remember that it's my feeling that the reason why finance fails companies is because it's complicated, it's scattered, and it's often individual focused. World-class benchmarking takes finance from complicated to simple, from scattered to focused, and from individual to team. Now, let's start off by answering the question, why does profitable growth matter? Now, let's ask a question. Which of these opposing forces is more important to increase the value of your business? Is it profitability or growth? Well, we did an academic study to find out. So let's go through that. Don't be afraid. I'll make it simple. First, we looked at 27,000 companies over 20 years, from 97 to 2016. We removed financial companies like banks because we're not looking at their performance. That left us with 23,500 non-financial companies. From that, we removed another 4,000 stocks that didn't have the fundamental financial data we needed to do the calculation. Now, we only included large companies in this study. We wanted to prevent a bias of focusing on little companies and getting a result that may not apply once a company becomes middle size or large size. So we looked at companies that were larger than 500 million US dollars. We also eliminated extreme outliers, very strange cases. So we excluded stocks that had a price rise of more than 500% or a loss of worse than negative 80% in any one year. Now this left us with on average 4,500 stocks per year. And the minimum in the first years were about 1,500 and the maximum in the latest years was about 8,400. I don't think that you can get a wider universe to analyze. If you do, you may be damaging the actual results of the report. So, imagine you invested $100 million equally in all of those companies over 20 years and let that grow for 20 years. Now, what you would find is if you started at 100, the universe would end up being worth 342. It wasn't really a great time in global markets. We can see an average annual return of 5%. Now, so the universe of stocks that we're looking at grew to 342, which is up 5%. Now, what if each year you invested in only the companies that ranked the best for profitability? We ranked all companies and you only bought the best companies for profitability. And each year you rebalance your portfolio, making sure to kick out companies that had fallen in their ranking and bringing in the companies that had risen to the highest profitability ranking. Would you end up with more or less than 342? Well, it seems like if you're trying to get the companies that are highly profitable, you would end up with more, right? Well, let's look at the result. What we find is high profitability companies generated more than 2 times the market return. We can see that investing in high profitability companies caused that 100 to grow to become 772. Now that's a 10% average annual return or 2 times the performance of just investing in all the stocks in the universe. So using a fundamental factor such as profitability is beneficial when you pick stocks, and it means that the value of those companies grew higher. Now, so the universe of stocks grew to 342, which was up 5%, and the high profitability stocks grew to 772, which was up 2 times or 10%. So now, what if each year you invested in only the companies that rank best, not for profitability, but for growth? When I'm talking about growth, I'm talking about EPS growth, earnings per share. So imagine that you rebalance your portfolio each year, making sure to kick out the companies that had fallen in the rankings and bringing in the companies that had risen to the highest growth ranking. Would you end up with more or less than 342? More or less than 772? Now, I'll also mention that when I look at high profitability, I'm looking at ROA. Now, if you said that you should earn more than 772, you're basically saying that growth is a better, EPS growth is a better measure for picking stocks that go up, or we can also say increasing the value of a firm. So what do we find in the research? Well, high growth companies generated more than 3 times the market return. Investing in high growth companies caused that 100 million to grow to 1,700 and 1,178. Oops, got a little error in that bullet. Now, that's a 13% annual return, which is 3 times the performance of just the universe. So what's the conclusion? If you have to choose between high profitability and high growth as a way of picking stocks, you would prefer high growth. In fact, you could say that the market doesn't care where the growth is coming from profitability or expanding sales, but they reward high growth. So it makes sense. It also makes sense that high growth companies are companies that are increasing the value of their businesses, and investors are willing to pay more for that value. Now, so let's wrap this up. We've got a universe, just investing in the universe of all stocks in our portfolio there, in the list of stocks that we've described. You'd be up 342 million or 5%. If you looked at high profitability stocks, you'd be up 772, up 10%. And high growth stocks, you'd be up 1178, which is up a pretty significant 13%. So now, what if each year you invested in only the companies that rank best for profitability and growth, or the measure that I call profitable growth? And you rebalance your portfolio each year, making sure to kick out companies that had fallen in their profitable growth ranking and bringing in companies that have risen into the highest profitable growth ranking. Would you end up with more or less than 342, 772, or 1,178? That's already pretty high. You could massively outperform the market if you bought the companies that had high growth. So the combination of the two, what should it equal? Well, here's what we found. Before we do that, let's just review. We have 5% for the universe, 10% for high profitability, and 13% for high growth. So what will we find? Well, we're asking the question, does the combined metric of profitable growth yield a higher return than profitability and growth separately? And here's what we find. High profitable companies generated almost 10 times the market return. Investing in high profitable growth companies caused 100 million to grow to 3,013 million, or massive, 3 billion. Now that's a 19% average annual return, which is 10 times the performance of just the universe. So if you have the choice, well, profitability, high profitability is better than the market. High growth is better than high profitability, but high profitable growth is better than them all by a mile. So what we can now see is the universe produced 5%, high profitability produced average annual return of 10%, high growth produced 13%, and high profitability and growth, or our profitable growth measure, produced 19%. Now, let's review what you've learned. High profitability companies, which I call strongest companies, generated more than 2 times market return over the past 20 years. That's 10% annual return versus the market's 5. High growth, the fastest companies, earn more than 3 times the market return at 13%. So you would prefer high growth, the fastest companies, over high profitability companies. Now, high profitable growth companies, what I call strongest, fastest companies, generated 10 times the market return over the past 20 years. A portfolio of high profitable growth companies yielded the highest annual return of 19% compared to 5% for the market. So you would prefer companies with consistently high profitable growth score. So why does this matter? Profitable growth is the measure, the one measure that I use to measure the performance of a company, to measure the financial performance of a company. And I feel that though there are many different measures, we could look at ROE, we could look at net margin, we could look at EBITDA margin, we could look at many measures. This one measure, profitable growth, is good enough for me, and I believe it is good enough to get your company to world class. So, world-class benchmarking makes finance from complicated to simple, and we bring scattered financial information to focused on profitable growth. And we take individual incentives and focus people on the teamwork necessary to increase your profitable growth score. You can learn more about world-class benchmarking at astotz.com/WCB. I'll see you there, and I'll see you in the next video.